and diplomacy. We are for urgent cessation of violence, and we are prepared to contribute in whatever way to these objectives. I noticed you refer to oil purchases. If you are looking at energy purchases from Russia, I would suggest that your attention should be focused on Europe, which probably we do buy some energy which is necessary for our energy security, but I suspect, looking at the figures, probably our total purchases for the month would be less than what Europe does in an afternoon. So you might want to think about it.
In terms of wallet.
First of all, thank you for the advice and suggestions in your question. I prefer to do it my way and articulate it my way. Now, as Secretary Jaishankar has pointed out, we have made a number of statements which outline our position in the UN, in our Parliament, and in other forums. And briefly, what those positions state is that we are against the conflict, we are for dialogue and diplomacy, we are for urgent cessation of violence, and we are prepared to contribute in whatever way to these objectives. I noticed you refer to oil purchases. If you are looking at energy purchases from Russia, I would suggest that your attention should be focused on Europe, which probably we do buy some energy which is necessary for our energy security, but I suspect, looking at the figures, probably our total purchases for the month would be less than what Europe does in an afternoon. So you might want to think about it.
In terms of wallet.
Joining me on the broadcast is my colleague Abhishek Kapoor to give us more information on this. Jaishankar, now giving it back to the Western media on India's purchases of energy. Abhishek, what more can you tell us?
Well, so this was calling a spade a spade. It could not have been more forthright than that. With all the softness that Dr. Jaishankar could, he has really done some plain speaking, the true hallmark of a diplomat there. But we are told that even in the direct conversations that took place between him and his counterpart, Antony Blinken, and the 2+2 ministerial, in fact, even in the Prime Minister's virtual meeting with President Biden, Indian side had a very candid conversation, and Americans sort of came round to appreciating India's position. So that's how it is. But then at the press briefing, Dr. Jaishankar making it clear that if at all the media should be looking at the West, particularly Europe, because it continues to make its purchases so far as American administration is concerned. They have made it clear that fuel purchases are beyond the pale of sanctions as of now. So I think India is not in breach of any international consensus, even as we continue to take care of our energy security, Christina. All right, Crispino. So the position, India's stated position, which has been communicated at all levels to all interlocutors in the West. The next could be the British Prime Minister. He's coming to India later this month. And remember, there was some issue with the British because a parliamentary delegation's visit was delayed or postponed because they thought that this would be some kind of this would be putting some pressure on India because they wanted India to be more on the side of West, pick up tabs on the part of West when it comes to dealing with Russia. But then remember, we have our own long-term partnership with the Russians, and it's an all-encompassing relationship. Also remember, when it comes to diplomacy, it's always better that there is a window of dialogue open and available. We have seen how The Israelis,
Absolutely.
for example, even the French have been communicating with Russians. So if India keeps its channel open, the West should not be objecting.
Absolutely, Abhishek, as you're pointing out, this what we are hearing from the External Affairs Minister is actually putting it briskly that at the end of the day, India is only using 1% of its oil requirements from Russia, while Europe is the guilty party which actually imports most of its oil requirements from Russia. Let's once again listen in, Abhishek, to what the Foreign Affairs Minister just said.
In the UN, in our parliament, and in other forums. And briefly, what those positions state is that we are against the conflict. We are for dialogue and diplomacy. We are for urgent cessation of violence. And we are prepared to contribute in whatever way to these objectives. I noticed you refer to oil purchases. If you are looking at energy purchases from Russia in the UN, in our parliament, and in other forums. And briefly, what those positions state is that we are against the conflict. We are for dialogue and diplomacy. We are for urgent cessation of violence. And we are prepared to contribute in whatever way to these objectives. I noticed you refer to oil purchases. If you are looking at energy purchases from Russia in the UN, in our parliament.
Well, Colonel Rohit Dev is also now joining me on the phone line. Colonel Dev, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Do you think that was a befitting reply perhaps to the Western media, which continuously targets India for its purchases, even though if you look at the actual numbers, they're much less than, what Europe actually imports from Russia?
Right. So it was very aptly brought out by our Honorable External Affairs Minister. And I think there are two facets in diplomacy and geopolitics today. And one of the arms of diplomacy today is the media. And that is how some independent, views come out from the country, the perception of the people, the media itself. And certain information is fed to the media to ask a visiting dignitary or otherwise. While I'm very sure between the United States of America and India, there is a very clear understanding about this crisis. It's more of a consultational approach which the U.S. has at the highest diplomatic level with our country. It is not seeking India to participate in a war. It is not seeking India to, make its own national interest subservient to any other country. So I'm quite sure at the highest level we agree, and that's what one gauged from the, virtual interaction between President Joe Biden and our Honorable Prime Minister as well last evening. So I think we are very well placed geopolitically, but these media perceptions and how to ask a question is something which is a trademark and a hallmark of many countries, including ours. And we do get a lot of answers there. But what is very much, happy to note today is that the 2+2 not only was well received by the United States, their own president came and met before, ministers from both the sides. Today, if you go to the press release of the Department of Defense, which has come out with all the nuances of the discussion, I think it's more to do with deeper cooperation in 5 or 7 spheres, including public health and otherwise. And they talk about this bone of contention called Ukraine and how we reacted in the UN, or how we're going to see our oil imports. Believe you me, India is going to decide on the fate and choices to ensure its national interests prevail. Whether energy, renewable energy tomorrow coming up in a big way, there are niche technologies available worldwide.
Absolutely.
So nobody's going to dictate to us. So
absolutely, Colonel Rohit Dev. In fact, that's the signal that's been going out from the government that we will act in national interest, and whatever we feel is right, we will do for the country. For the moment, thank you very much for joining us. Now, this was a very stern response that was given by the External Affairs Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar, on his visit to the US.